This is Jim Fetzer with James Fetzer News with my special guest today, David W. Mantik, M.D., Ph.D., who is the leading expert on the medical evidence in the assassination of JFK in the world today. David, in your recent studies of your skull x-rays, which are found on assassinationscience.com, you commented on how the Assassination Records Review Board had consulted with 3 experts about the x-rays, even though those reports were not released. Could you please tell us about them, where the first is found on slide 57, Douglas Ubelaker, a forensic anthropologist?
Yes, Douglas Ubelaker was the first medical consultant. His first comment was about the red spot, which is seen on the back of JFK's head. And we're talking about the photographs taken at the autopsy. The red spot was identified as a bullet entry wound by the HSCA in particular. And this was the basis of their case that he had been shot from the rear. I've taken quite a different tack on this. I've suggested that this was not authentic. And what's surprising is that none of the 3 pathologists agreed that it was an entry either, so they agreed with me. I suggested that this was added in the dock room to implicate Oswald. Now, here's what Ubelaker says. He says the red spot does not look like a wound. He was surprised that the HSCA chose this as an entry wound. On the x-rays, his first comment was about the 6.5 millimeter metallic object. This lies inside JFK's right orbit and was also a firm foundation for the HSCA case against Oswald, essentially, because they concluded that there was a posterior entry site at the back of the head from a 6.5 millimeter bullet, and that would implicate Oswald. But Ubelaker says that he saw no partner image for this thing on the lateral, and that's exactly what I've been saying for years. He was surprised that the HSCA described this as a bullet fragment at the back of the skull. He said the damage on the photographs to the scalp and bone suggests a frontal bullet. That would have astonished the HSCA. He even implies that the appearance of the scalp does not match in 2 photographs, another point I've made. I think that summarizes his views.
David, the second of these experts, who is discussed on your slide 58, Robert Kirschner, was a forensic pathologist.
Yes, you'll notice that they used 3 different types of experts. Kirschner found no inconsistencies between the autopsy photographs and the autopsy x-rays. My response is quite simple. I would ask him, did he compare the dark area on the lateral x-ray, which implies no brain, to the autopsy photographs, which implies essentially 100% brain? Anyway, he said no inconsistencies. He also agreed that the red spot probably was an entry wound, but that he could not determine the direction of the bullet. On the frontal x-ray, he said that there was no entry wound that he could find. Same thing on the lateral x-ray. But here's the observation that I found most interesting from him. We'll see this photograph in a minute, but there's a mystery photograph often called F8. In the upper left, Kirschner identified a yellow spot, which he described as muscle and fat that was exposed during the Y incision. This is at the front of JFK's body in the thorax and abdomen. And Kirschner and I are the only ones so far to have noticed this. His final comment was quite striking. He said he very much doubted the single bullet theory.
Which, of course, is the fulcrum, the pivotal point for the Warren Commission report, the House Select Committee final report, and even Gerald Posner's book, Case Closed, because if the magic bullet theory is false, then their accounts are completely unsustainable.
Yeah, he just cuts out the legs from their final conclusion.
Now, on slide 59, we have the mystery photo F8, which has defied many attempts at its orientation and interpretation, but where you appear to have been successful.
Yes. If you go through this lecture, you'll be able to see why I've given it this interpretation. But I should emphasize that the first official review by the pathologist gave it the same interpretation. We both look at this as a view from the back of JFK. Now, when I was at the archives, I did something else. I used a large format stereo viewer, so I could look at two almost identical images simultaneously, and as a result, I had a three-dimensional view of the back of JFK's head. The back was my interpretation, of course. But I noticed in the upper left of this particular photograph that I could see the nipple, I could see the chest wall, and I could see the fat from the Y incision in the distance here. This is the only way you can do this. It's impossible to do in any published pictures in books. And I was quite pleased that Kirschner agreed with me in this interpretation. And here's why that's important. If we are seeing those items at that location, it does mean that this is a view of the back of the head. And that's very powerful, because then we can see exactly where bone was missing and tissue was missing. And this interpretation is entirely consistent with the one that I have described in lectures and photographs that I've showed. There was a large defect at the back of JFK's head, and we can even identify where the Harper fragment should lie in place and where metal on it should occur. That precisely matches the entry chosen by the pathologist near the right occipital protuberance.
David, the third consultant that the ARRB chose was John J. Fitzpatrick, a forensic radiologist.
Yes, he was the one to whom the other two deferred because of his expertise in radiology. He said that the left frontal brain was present, presumably in the dark area, but the x-rays, the lateral x-rays, are not consistent with this. If you do optical density measurements, there's essentially no brain there at all. He said he could find no entry wound on the lateral or the AP x-ray. That was also in some disagreement with the HSCA. He said the 6.5 millimeter object is metallic, but by doing so, he disagreed with Larry Sturdivant, who was the expert for the HSCA. Of course, I don't agree with that either. I think it's a fake, placed in the darkroom. But he did note that this object has no partner on the lateral, and that's very important. A real object must have a partner on the lateral. He did say that there was a small metallic trace at the rear where this thing should be seen, but it did not have the correct optical density. And that's, of course, exactly the point that I've been making all these years. He said the direction of the bullet could not be determined. He also added that the frontal bone was present up to the hairline. That's precisely what I sketched many years ago, and that has been published in books. Without the body, he said he could not interpret the red spot or the white spot. That's very powerful, because the red spot was such a foundation stone for the HSCA in particular. And here we have the expert saying he could not interpret it. And I like that very much, because I've been saying that the red spot is also fake, added in the darkroom later to mislead.
David, I'm very surprised that he did not find your work or that of Randy Robertson to be persuasive, simply on the grounds that you are not forensic radiologists. Given your background, in my own opinion, would be that you are probably the more qualified of the two, even in comparison with Fitzpatrick himself.
Well, I did send him a letter listing 12 points of agreement between us and no certain points of disagreement, depending on how things were interpreted. And he eventually replied, actually not too long ago, but it was just a civil letter saying that he did not want to get into any discussion of serious issues, and he didn't want to get involved in any controversy.
David, if I interpret this correctly, these three reports provide powerful confirmation for your own research on the autopsy x-rays, which of course indicate that they've been altered and fabricated in various ways, including imposing a patch at the back of the head to conceal that massive blowout, and by adding a 6.5 millimeter metallic slice to implicate a weapon that ironically could not have fired the bullets that killed the president. Therefore, I'm very distressed that these reports were not released by the ARRB.
Yes, you're right about that. This is very powerful corroboration for so much of what I've been saying for so many years. I was simply delighted to see that independent, and we need to underline that word, independent medical consultants disagreed in so many serious ways with previous government investigations.
David, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the show and for your magnificent contributions to the scientific study of the death of John F. Kennedy. I am very grateful to you for coming here today.
Thank you very much, Jim.